Hey nerds, what's up? In case you missed it, there was a huge controversy over the 2023 Hugo Awards, which are widely considered to be the most prestigious awards you can get in science fiction and fantasy literature. For the quick recap, the 2023 Hugo Awards were held in China, and after suspicious voting patterns came to light, it was discovered that books and authors were considered ineligible for political reasons, aka things that might be offensive to China. Now, this story has slowly been uncovered, and at this time, I don't know if it's known whether or not this was motivated by officials in China itself, or if this was just a preemptive thing committee members did within the Hugos. I think it's important to state that while the Hugo Awards have had a few controversies in the past, I think this one feels particularly impactful or worrying because while the past controversies had been more external, this one was more internally motivated. It started internally and was sort of tried to be covered up. Now, there are a ton of great videos that go into the nitty-gritty details of this controversy. You might have seen that Daniel Green posted 2 videos on the topic. I also quite enjoyed the video done by Book Chats with Shelley on it. You can also see responses from authors directly affected, like R.F. Kuang or Sharon J. Xiao. So if you want the details, if you want the reactions, you can go search those sources out, because today I actually don't really want to focus on the controversy at all, but rather the fallout from it. What does this mean for the future of book awards? What does it mean for awards in general, and specifically the Hugo Awards? I've actually seen a lot of people calling for a boycott of the Hugos. Because I've done a few videos on the Hugo Awards already, I have already in the past, before this happened, seen comments like, the Hugo Awards don't matter. Who follows them anyway? I don't care about them. They don't represent fantasy anymore, etc., etc. And is that true? Is that the general consensus? Honestly, it feels like the most famous awards are more steeped in controversy than ever today. Now, although I don't follow them very closely, you don't have to really be in the know to hear about all sorts of controversies surrounding the Grammy Awards or the Academy Awards. This year being a great example when people were up in arms about particular nominations they felt were snubs. So today we're gonna look at these awards in general in a different light. Why do we have awards, period? Do they matter? We're gonna specifically ask, do the Hugo Awards matter? Do they matter to authors, whether that's monetarily, emotionally, opening doors in publishing, or through legacy? Do the Hugo Awards matter to fans? And if so, how much? We're also going to talk about how these awards tend to always be mired in controversy and why judging art is so difficult in general. Okay, so I'll see you after the jump. We're going to start with a brief history of awards. Why as a society do we even give so many awards? Why do we want to or are constantly driven to this? Let's look a little bit at the history, a little bit at the psychology. Although, in my opinion, awards have probably been around in some format since the beginning of what we call civilization. The most widely known award system started in 776 BC with the Olympics in ancient Greece, and they were immensely popular. I mean, we're still holding Olympics today, so I don't really think I needed to state that. And it's around the same time period that we see a lot of evidence in almost every other civilization, whether ancient Egypt or China or India, that sporting events of various natures were held and were awarded. Now, I'll put all of those kind of awards in the general category of sport. They were physical contests, and they're probably the things we think of the most when we think of early award or celebrations of achievement. But there was another kind as well that was very popular throughout history, although we probably associate it most with the Middle Ages, and that's some sort of valor award. These were the type of awards centered around moral codes, chivalry, or most likely valor in war or services specifically to your monarch. Knighthood itself was a form of award. It was literally an order of merit, a holy order, created by the church and bestowed. And these warriors who could be recognized for bravery or loyalty to the rulers would often get monetary gain. Something I want to bring up now, because I think it'll be a little bit relevant later, is I think there's a general feeling that awards today have become more politicized, that they aren't just like simple awards for the best thing. But when we look at these ancient awards, sure, physical awards feel much simpler in a lot of ways. Who can race their chariot the fastest? who can get the most bullseyes in archery, who can do, throw something the furthest. It feels pretty cut and dry. But I think it's important to remember that a lot of these sports endeavors actually started out as militaristic skills, things that would help a military through these physical efforts. And as far as the knighthood type of awards, there are a lot of things that are considered key to what was considered an ancient civilization. And yes, one of them was class hierarchy. It isn't far-fetched for me to think that these ancient civilizations, even before we have recorded awards, were engaging in awarding people for service to the monarchy, for service to any sort of government that they had. And that's by definition political in nature. Essentially, I think in some forms, ever since we have formed civilizations, awards and recognitions have been a part of that framework. And honestly, I don't even think any of you really needed that history lesson when we consider what most of us know about basic psychology and psychological needs. I'm sure you remember in some form from your early education days, but I feel like we were always talking in some way about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Abraham Maslow posited that human needs were arranged in a hierarchy such that we as humans need some basic needs or survival needs met first, and then intellectual needs can be met afterwards. I always remember it being described as you need like food, water, and shelter first, and then you need to feel safe, and then you need a family or emotional connection or relationships. And we see that in the pyramid here. But often ignored are the other steps in this period of needs: self-esteem and self-actualization, both which fit nicely and neatly within this idea of awards: the need for confidence, achievement, respect of others, and to experience purpose and inner potential. Honestly, there could be an argument there for even sense of belonging and connection being connected with awards. Honestly, this can be seen in a lot more cynical ways as well. While I was researching for this video, I could not believe the amount of stuff that came up in the corporate world about how to award your employees to keep up morale, and all these tips and tricks to give out like awards and recognitions so that employees have high morale and feel valued and want to stay. I think there's just like a very general recognition that people like to feel valued, and one way to feel valued is to be outwardly recognized for the work you are doing. And that can obviously come in many, many different forms, but today we are specifically talking about awards. And I started with this historical context because I think it is actually vital to help us answer the question of like, well, let's just stop giving awards. It's just not going to happen. I think awards and this kind of recognition have literally been built into our civilizations and our frameworks in such a way that we are always going to want to give awards and be awarded. The void will always be filled. If we get rid of one award, another one will rise to take its place. So the question shouldn't really be, let's stop giving awards. Why do we even give awards? They don't mean anything anyway, because that's simply not true. They do mean something. Instead, we need to ask more about what they mean and how we could perhaps change the way we give or do awards to make them more meaningful. Now that we have that base, let's dive into the Hugo Awards specifically. Do the Hugo Awards matter in particular, and if so, how much? If you are unfamiliar with the Hugo Awards, I have an entire video explaining them and how they work, so you can watch that if you need more context. But I think the really important thing to keep in mind is that, if you didn't know, the Hugo Awards are not voted on by committee or by a panel of experts. They are fan voted. Now, specifically, fans that have bought tickets to attend Worldcon. So you do have to pay a certain fee to get a ticket to Worldcon to be able to vote in the Hugos, but other than that, there's no other prerequisite. First, I want to dive in and discuss whether or not the Hugo Awards mean anything to authors, and I want to look at three specific categories, which are monetarily, emotionally, and legacy. Let's dive into monetarily first. Do the Hugo Awards matter at all when it comes to sales? Most people think it does, but that doesn't do enough for me. I want the data. I want the hard numbers, and nobody's releasing them. To start, I just did a cursory search about what people are saying about the subject, and it led me, of course, to a Wikipedia page on the subject where they list a few quotes on the matter, all stating that yes, Hugos matter for sales. However, since I'm annoying, I decided to actually track down all the primary sources for these quotes. And first, let me tell you, that was a big pain in the butt. It was really hard tracking down some of these sources, but I am so glad I did because the context for a lot of them changes the natures of the quote. So I need you to trust me as we go through these quotes one by one, because I think it'll be beneficial to give us a clearer picture. Now, first off, I could not find the source for this first quote anywhere. It was not available to buy digitally. It was not available on any of my library apps or physically in my library. The only way I could get a hold of this was going to be to purchase a physical copy that was going to take 4 weeks to get to me. So I apologize, we had to skip this one. The next source was the 1990 book by Orson Scott Card, How to Write Science Fiction and Fantasy. This is the quote that said that the Hugo Awards have a larger effect on foreign sales. But let's actually read the full quote, which gives a little different context. There is also a great deal of talk about how the major awards, Hugos and Nebulas, lead to wealth and fame. It's true that foreign sales generally rise for authors who have won these awards. Foreign editors often have few other guides as to who is hot in the US, which remains the heart of science fiction. But many winners will tell you that a Hugo or Nebula is no guarantee that a work will even remain in print. In short, while it's lovely to receive awards, they should be appreciated for what they mean, that a certain number of people like your work. Don't expect any more than that, and certainly don't make the slightest change in your writing or your behavior in an attempt to win one. If you win, fine. If you don't, that's also fine. The awards rarely go to the most innovative writers until long after their best work is done. I personally think this full quote gives a very different flavor to that sentiment, that really the rise in sales in foreign markets was because it was an easy way to see what was trending in the United States in those subjects. And it's also important to note the time period which this was written in 1990, which we're gonna talk a little bit about later, which I think also affects that idea. I also think it's interesting that Card went on to say that it might not even be a guarantee to stay in print. Like, it won't necessarily lead to that. It just could. The next quote is a Spider Robinson quote from 1992, saying that publishers were very interested in authors that won a Hugo Award more so than other awards. That was from a magazine entitled Science Fiction Culture. The full quote reads, in context of the book it was written in, "To a critic looking in from the outside, the awards and the award ceremony may seem to represent the fetishization of the commodity, mass-marketed pulp fiction. A closer look, however, reveals something deeper, a demonstration of the power to shape the genre that the fan community shares with the industry." As master of ceremonies, Spider Robinson, well-known writer of science fiction, explained before announcing the winners at MagicCon, the 1992 Worldcon in Orlando, Florida. Spider Robinson: "Publishers do pay attention to the professionals. They do pay careful attention to who wins the Nebula Awards. But the ones they really pay attention to are those who win the Hugo Awards. It can make the difference between driving a cab and writing science fiction for a living." End quote. Publishers pay attention to the Hugo Awards because they understand through experience a fact that critics of fan culture dismiss. Fandom does accurately represent the reading taste of the vast majority of readers who do not themselves wish to participate or have never heard of fandom. Ironically, few eligible participants actually vote for the Hugo Awards. Once again, we aren't actually getting any hard numbers or hard data, but we are going to see a trend emerge, which is that there's a lot of talk that publishers pay attention to who wins the Hugo Awards. I feel like that's a thing much easier to measure because the people talking are people who are publishers or are literary agents and are directly in the business and can say, yes, I have seen it have an effect. Next, we've got literary agent Richard Curtis saying in 1996, in Mastering the Business of Writing, that having the term Hugo Award on the cover was a powerful inducement to science fiction fans to buy a novel. Within the context of the book, this appears in a chapter under the term escalators. Excuse me while I read both the introduction to the chapter and the portion that mentions the Hugo Awards. I feel they are both vital for the context and will add a lot to this discussion. Chapter 15, Escalators. A term commonly heard in discussions of book deals is escalator. For instance, her book was bought for an advance that, with escalators, could exceed $1 million. Escalators are additional advance payments made by publishers to authors if and when certain contingencies occur. What are those contingencies? How much are they worth? And what, if anything, is their real value? Escalators were created, among other reasons, to bridge the gap between author and publisher when negotiations reach an impasse. You strongly believe your book will be a bestseller or will be bought by a major book club or made into a motion picture, and you feel that your advance should reflect the same optimism on your publisher's part. Your publisher, on the other hand, hopes and prays you're right, but has seen many a slip twist the cup and the lip. He cannot afford to overpay authors on the strength of hope alone. Of course, if your track record justifies it, if your last 5 books have soared to the top of the bestseller list, been major selections in major book clubs, and been made into hit movies, he will be greatly disposed to pay you a lot of money up front. But let us say, for the sake of argument, that this is not the case. There are other contingencies that may trigger escalator payments. Some contracts call for bonuses to be paid if a book wins a major prize or award that has promotional value, Pulitzer, National Book Award, and the like. In some science fiction book contracts, I have negotiated bonuses for winning Nebula or Hugo Awards. In a few cases, I even work in bonuses for nominations for those awards. To science fiction fans, the words Nebula or Hugo on the cover of a book are powerful inducements to buy that book, even if the word nominee is printed beside them. Once again, we're continuing to see the trend where people are claiming that there is a sale increase for winning or being nominated for these awards, although none of them are backed up with any numbers that I can see, but the general feeling is that. But more importantly, when we look at actual numbers, it is affecting publishers. It is affecting the money an author can gain by respecting the community. I won this award, I was a nominee, so they have more trust in me, then I can negotiate a bigger contract because of that. Finally, the last quote mentioned in Wikipedia is Joe Walton claiming in 2011 that the Hugo is the only science fiction award that actually affects sales of book. First, I had to buy this book because I literally could not find it any other way, so let's acknowledge that. Although in fairness, I probably will end up reading this book because the concept of it seems fascinating. This quote is found in the introduction to An Informal History of the Hugos, which was something that was compiled and released in 2018, although Wikipedia does have it right that the introduction was written much earlier in 2011, and this will become important later. The statement in question reads, "They're science fiction's most important award, and they're entirely fan-voted and fan-administered. I care about them passionately, not just as a writer, but also as a fan. There's no financial prize, but I've been told that it's the only genre award that actually affects the sales of a book." That's it. That's the quote. She's been told that they affect the sales of a book. By who, Joe? Let me know. Give me the numbers. Someone, anywhere. Okay, so why did I make you listen to all of that and read all of that with me? What was the point of this journey? Well, let me tell you my personal takeaways. One, it seems pretty clear that winning these awards can affect your journey within the publishing community, that it can give you respect, it can give you bargaining chips or leverage for your career. Apparently, it does show an increased amount of sales. We just have no proof on how much or the longevity. For me, I can easily see that this probably leads to a boost of sales right after winning or getting a nomination. The question is what's the longevity of those sales? Is having that sticker on a book still a powerful enough motivator for people to buy it or not? You know, we haven't tracked those numbers, so I'm not willing to say whether it's true or not, or how much at least it is. But finally, the most important takeaway for me here is that the most modern of these quotes was written in 2011. Every single other quote was from 1990s or earlier. Our book buying habits have changed a lot since then, and I know you are tired of me saying this, but it's because of the internet. Before large internet communities that we have now, how were people finding out about new SFF to purchase? It was probably going to your bookstore and scanning the shelves, where a sticker like that could mean a lot. It was probably looking up these awards, following these awards. It was following major publications or well-respected book reviewers in the space and seeing what they recommended. I'm guessing because the Hugos were such an important event, all of them were covering the Hugos. Think about how we buy books post-internet age, and especially post-Amazon, right? We're getting recommendations, we're getting just, this was the best sellers, this is in trending. Think about all the avenues we have now of non-professional reviewers, TikTok, Bookstagram, and yes, hello, YouTube, obviously. Or even think of Goodreads. There are extremely popular reviewers like our very own Patrick Leo, who actually affects and moves book sales, and that has been measured. There are just such a more diverse way to get recommendations and also never step foot into a bookstore or look and see that sticker when you're buying online. Now, of course, these sorts of things are always difficult to measure, so it's hard to say if the effect has lessened, and if so, how much, or if it ever had an effect. We may never know. Additionally, Because statistical data in general takes a really long time to see trends, the way our book buying habits have changed are honestly too recent, too new, too modern to really make grand statements. We're gonna have to wait another decade probably before we can kind of make overall commentary about this time period in book buying habits. So while awards probably do have some sort of influence on the monetary value today, it's really hard to measure how much. And honestly, I'd probably make the argument that these awards matter much more within the industry themselves than necessarily affecting direct bottom line sales. And also as like a parting argument, if you really wanted to make a statement on what probably sells the most books, it's probably going viral on TikTok. If we're gonna talk about who sold the most books, was it last year's Hugo winner or Fourth Wing, which somehow got like this huge boon on TikTok and now everybody's reading it? Once again, this is a really easy way to see how book buying habits have changed. And this all happened not because of an award, but literally just virality. Of course, winning an award feels different, right? Feels different than just going viral on TikTok. So let's talk about some other factors that might play into that. Let's talk about the emotional impact of winning an award for an author. In an effort to keep this video under 2 hours, I am not going to read the myriad of quotes I found of authors saying what it means to win a Hugo Award. But there are a lot out there. And I think we covered this already in our previous psychological needs section. Of course, it must feel so wonderful and validating to be nominated or win one of these awards, validating that fans are liking it enough, validating within the industry. It must feel so good that all the work you poured into this novel meant something, or at least you have a physical manifestation of what it meant. We could make a claim that authors just get excited because they feel like they have to mention it, they have to talk about it, but they don't really care. I find that hard to believe. There may be a few personalities out there where external validation does not matter at all, but I think most of us recognize that external validation feels extremely good, especially when the reputation is that the Hugos are the most prestigious award in SFF. As Joe Walton put it in the same book I just mentioned earlier. And of course, in 2012, after I had finished the series, I won the Best Novel Hugo myself for my novel Among Others. I described my feelings about this at the time as stunned and awed, which I really was. I was thrilled enough to be nominated. That would have been enough. I'd written all these posts explaining how the nominees were what was important, and I truly believe that. Actually winning a Hugo myself after writing these posts and thinking deeply about how important they were can be described only in terms of old magazine titles: astounding, amazing, fantastic, fantasy, and science fiction. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about legacy. Do the Hugo Awards guarantee an author's legacy? Who can even define legacy and what that means? But I think one way we could try to measure it is which Hugo Award winners are still in print, and are they still relevant today? I checked every Hugo Award winner, which comes out to be about 70 winners since the awards started in 1953. Now, some years they didn't award anyone, some years had more awards, there was also some post awards, but in general, about 70 books have been awarded. Out of all of those winners, only 2 were out of print, which I felt like was pretty good considering how long it's been going on. Now, there are a few things here. I didn't check all the nominees because it would take a really long time, and Joe Walton in her book talks about how several of the nominees have gone out of print, so my guess is more of the nominees have gone out of print, which maybe means being a Hugo winner does cement your legacy. However, there's another kind of chicken and the egg problem where it's, did the Hugo Award guarantee that this book was still in print when it otherwise wouldn't have been? Or is it that the Hugo Awards were especially good at choosing books that were going to have a lasting impact anyway? The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Some of these books would have always had a lasting impact no matter what, whereas other books maybe would have faded into obscurity without the help of the Hugo win. In the end, I feel like legacy ties in a little bit to our last point in that I bet authors feel like winning or being nominated for a Hugo Award ties into their legacy. It probably does overall help a little bit in terms of longevity and how long you'll be in print and be relevant, but once again, these things are just really hard to measure. So we talked a lot about authors, and now it's time to talk about us, the fans, the non-writers, the people who like to just read and enjoy these stories that we love so much. I'm gonna say, well, obviously they matter to fans because it feels like a lot of people are invested in them. I think there are probably several reasons for this. One is really simple, which is just like an easy way to keep up on what's new. What's new in science fiction and fantasy? What are other people liking and reading? What are other things I can put on my book list that have been released this year, instead of just kind of the more famous ones that I know a lot about already? I also just think fans like to see stuff they like win things. When I was doing my research around this, a lot of it focused on sports teams in particular and like sport teams fanaticism. But I think the takeaways from that can be applied to almost any fandom, whether music, movie, or yes, books. Without getting too in the weeds, fandoms often function like communities. They help fulfill that basic need we talked about earlier to feel emotionally connected to people, to feel like a sense of belonging. They sort of talked about the phenomenon that when a sports team wins, their fans will often say, "We won, not my team won," and how there is that sense of camaraderie, and how you feel like you are part of it, and by rooting for that team, you somehow helped them to victory. And I think we can extrapolate that to the same way it feels when our favorite authors and our favorite books win. I also think there's an element of like, you like to feel like you have good taste. You like to feel like other people like what I like because what I like is good. It's also kind of like an internal validation for yourself that you know what's good and you like what other people appreciate. I also think we love to see the things we like succeed. It feels good to watch others succeed. And if an author or book we like wins an award, it feels like, oh, they are on the way to success. You know, when Brandon Sanderson had the most successful Kickstarter of all time, the fans loved talking about that because it felt like, see, he's great, everyone's loving him, he's gonna get big, maybe we'll get a movie made. You feel like you get to be a part of that success and root for them, and that, especially if you've been a fan for a long time, kind of seed their growth. So we can wax long about why awards aren't going away anytime soon from the author side because people need to be validated and win awards, but I think they're not going anywhere soon because of the fans as well. People want to create a hierarchy. People want to participate in wins. People want to see their favorites win and be successful and have a physical manifestation of that. Now that we've established that A, awards are important, and B, they're unlikely to be going anywhere, let's talk a little bit about why I think that awards like the Hugo Awards will just honestly always be mired in some sort of controversy. And that's because judging art is pretty difficult. There is a difference between awards like the Olympics, the Super Bowl, the World Cup, and awards like the Oscars, the Grammys, and the Hugos. Sports competitions are pretty cut and dry. There is a winner and a loser. Someone scored the most goals. There is a winner and a loser, and maybe you feel like technically the winning team didn't play as well, but there was a reason they won and it is on the scoreboard. Sure, there are controversies, but to my limited knowledge, they basically all revolve around some type of measurable cheating. Drugs, balls being inflated to the wrong degree, or signaling players. It's did you cheat or did you not? With art, the controversies get weirder. Who decides what's objectively good or bad art anyway? Art means a lot of different things to different people, and for the most part, art is extremely subjective. I even did a whole video on this because I find the subject so fascinating. Someone's favorite book or song or movie could be someone else's least favorite, and they think it's total garbage. And sure, we could look at numbers to try to give us a sense of what's popular and what's good, but people tend to balk if you say that whatever is the most popular must be the best artistically. People don't like the idea of being a bestseller being the only qualifier for what's good. And we definitely see this with the Hugo Awards, which rarely ever award the top SFF selling book of the year, rather focusing on other metrics for what's considered good that year. There are simply a lot of ways to judge good. I think narrowing the scope of awards can really help with this. Are we awarding the best debut author? Are we awarding the best new voices author, or just the best selling? But at some point, I think when you get so many awards, it starts feeling like they lose any meaning. My ultimate takeaway here is that there's really no good way to judge art. Sure, there might be some general consensus over time of some of the greats, but even then there can be conversation about how other innovators were ignored by either bad luck, prejudices, or other reasons. And even the most popular things have detractors and naysayers. Unfortunately, there's usually no universal opinion on what good art is, and it has always been that way, even throughout history. So what does all of this mean ultimately for the Hugos going forward after this controversy? Well, for one thing, I don't necessarily think a boycott is going to help a whole lot unless it's an extremely concentrated effort. For most of the previous Hugo controversies, honestly, boycotting would be the least helpful thing because those all involved like voting blocks. And so the more people who voted, the better that controversy got, if that makes sense. Now, I can understand how this one feels different. As we talked previously, it was more internal. But I feel like unless there was an extremely concentrated effort to vastly reduce votes, it wouldn't really move the needle. So there were about 2,300 ballots cast for the 2021 and 2022 Hugos, around 1,800 ballots cast for the 2023 Hugos. I feel like if you wanted to make a dent, you would have to try to get that number to like below 500 votes to really make a statement. Like there would have to be a concentrated drop off of people participating in the voting process to make waves, to have it reported on. Now that could legitimately make a statement. Well, maybe. It honestly depends on how much coverage it gets and really like how much people know about how the Hugos function in general. I'd love to know the percentage of people who just casually follow Hugos, like maybe look up the winners or just see it in a bookstore or have read a few of the Hugo winners, actually know what the process is. Or honestly, even know about the 2023 controversy. When I did my video on the Hugos around 2 years ago, I put up a quick poll on my YouTube community tab. It got around 1,100 votes, and the question was, right now, without looking it up, do you know who is in charge of nominating/awarding Hugo Awards? 7% of the voters said yes, and a staggering 93% of voters said no. As much as it seems to us in the know or who follow these things closely, I don't actually think the way Hugos are voted or any of these controversies really make mainstream readers' attention. The Hugos are the biggest name in fantasy and sci-fi awards, and honestly, I think damaging its reputation is going to be very difficult simply for how long it's been running and how many people actually know the ins and outs of what's going on. And even if its name was damaged, there's always going to be another award to fill in the gap who will likely fall to many similar controversies. I wish I had a better answer. I suppose voting is probably always the best way about it. If you are mad with how votes are coming out and how it's going, then getting involved and telling more people to vote to make the Hugos what fans want them to be is the best thing. Now, this doesn't really help the internal problem. People have resigned, so there is a movement there. And you know what? Honestly, thank you to the people who so diligently looked at all the numbers and discovered the discrepancy in the first place. That kind of involvement is what will hopefully keep these awards as honest as possible in the future, even though judging art, again, will never get less hard. Or you just decide you don't care about the Hugos, which is kind of where I've gotten to. Am I allowed to admit that on here after this entire video? Okay, this has been an extremely long video, and I would love to know your thoughts about awards in general, about the controversy this year at the Hugo Awards. What do you feel about my conclusions? How do you feel about it affecting authors and being a monetary gain? Do you agree that the change in book buying habits has changed maybe what an effect the awards have, even if they have the same prestige? What do the awards mean to you as a fan? Do you follow these at all? Is this all completely new information? Let me know in the comments below. As always, if you like these kind of deep dives, please like and subscribe. That is the best way to support me. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading, as well as other nerdy rants, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.